What's that?
Red House right here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm one. Let me just get a pen.
Yeah, I gotta get mine.
Solid.
Hang on 2 seconds.
Those are overrated.
Yes, that's feature. Did you open those?
Mm-hmm.
You should replace them.
Hold on, let me get that. Are the Macy's paperless?
Yeah.
Paperless? Okay. No, I think
We still don't know if the normal stuff in.
Yeah, I think it came from their printer bag, right? Yeah, that's how they keep their printer from smashing around.
Sure. No, it's yours. Do you need one thing? Oh, yeah.
No, I'm good. I'm just excited about the stuff.
Yeah.
Can he judge with me?
He can.
Does he have a name?
It's for you to decide.
Okay.
We had a hedgehog, and we named him Kagan, the hedgehog.
That's pretty funny.
He was adorable. But then I think Rufus took him, but I don't know where he went.
That sounds like something that
He
would
ran away. It was sad.
I like those water bottle filling stations.
Yeah, those are cool.
They're really cool, and the water tastes really good. It doesn't taste like terrible, like drinking fountain water. Yeah, it's like actually
purified.
cold. Yeah.
Hey, you're not full on one. This is
Nice.
the bottles that you
Nice.
use.
Very good.
Oh. What's the dog?
Yeah, that's right.
I can see it.
Is it red?
But also it's
What you said? Kennedy, you pulled out, John. Joel?
that sucks.
Right. I think we're good. When you do your juice tasting, it should be cool if we splashed both of these.
No, I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Not allowed.
No problem.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah. So whenever you're ready then.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. That's good.
Plan. The United States federal government should develop a communist in outer space beyond the Earth's atmosphere. The advantages of communism, certainly the communist idea into space represent hegemonic ideology, caucus, and at 9. The emergence of the radical future defined by from the world is the future of the merchant struggle seeks alien from the world is because the wise view reassuring the president war will find practically even to the president that is somebody hegemonic thought transmission from possible communist future and that's the game to the other truly but the most accountability on stars to found in the future and that's really the reason why everyone with living assertion of the communist ideas and necessary response to nationalization of the ideology capital. The plan is an active fidelity to the impulse of communism which is infinitely affirming the revolutionary potential of the communist hypothesis. Affirmation is essential to exposing the antagonists and their exclusion status quo. 9. A revolution possible over a pen with all the movements like the French Revolution or maybe the Free Party and the German Fergus to be assassinated. Everything should be without being a point beginning of the communists, found split after the communists, nothing is from the future, such kind of interest, possible holding on to something that is for sort of history, focus, power, the same must contain the as in fact, we describe to the duties held without existence, the hypothesis coming to be one that should be the reference to the actual social and unity for the communities to most people today, simply the liberal government, the communists, the voting, the best society, such all, only to try to make more just the democratic council, how to better long term, voting occidental, wholeheartedly signed enough to maintain the communist idea, and want to see the historical, things the idea of the lynching, Washington states, we endorse the crown of naturalization capital today, the local capitals in the United which are sufficient charge for that, it's in view of reproduction of historical state entities to make sure it's more exponential construction to include self-financial made assumption the capital watching close times be the life for your reference comments to justify resuscitation of the communities enables to see the present closure of the comments and process authorization of those who are thereby excluded from their own substance. We should not drop the notion of the proletariat, the present develops ratified by swinging existential law. We need a more accurate notion of humanitarian politics not from a combination of different ancient weight nexus that the contrast to the proletariat who and nothing to lose of the spirit nature lose everything the first is that we lose the abstract assumption that what all natural content are gender based heavily manipulative and all environment surrounded ourselves all proletarian security substance should have to be ethical to try to recognize ourselves in and the sphere we live in apocalypse times each of these stories process for doing apocalypse when you contribute down by checking reduction use of manipulative machine total in the control of our lives. All these little things are approaching to your point and upholding the communist ideas and active subjustification which outweighs any concerns for becoming a body of truth is necessary for actualization of ancestral policy. Even banal discussions about the idea of communism are politically allows to expand communism to create a truth from 10. The ideological operation of the idea of communism and projection of the political reign is small efficient in the history of the world as ideas to support the individual and the corporation into the list of the truth procedure to authorize the individual beyond states and constraints of surround the iconic part of body truth and switching about the projection of the truth procedure to show itself intended to be not only exception possibly that American shift for now with only our military experience of the truth procedure will come out one person on the truth body truth part the idea of communism body enables the truth procedure something in the imperial language statement thereby for the lines of virtue or words to take prescribes what is possible and what is impossible to shift over time the West order in action takes something to real political meaning far from the predetermined extension and then once they become to the place where politics are currently, they'll make a decision about whether to radar, which ought to be finally a crucial extension of the four works, and a student all over must not necessarily be the large dimension of communism, must be both what it is and what it will have been in this moment in the whole structure. The truth through the large of the symbol must become visible, that just needs to confer the past belief as well. Practice the 5% meanings and out of the way, so we must be eternal, the very expression of its precariousness, and part of parcel of fidelity to the event is the acceptance of the inherent risk and possibility of catastrophe that accompanies an idea which radically changes social and political warnings that exist in the refusal to risk the conference's success was a death wish for progressive policy. Check 9. It would be totally wrong to draw the conclusion that most left can do to help the Christ be limited, and that capitalism continue to guarantee real have standing limit for the growing number of people strong radical politics that may help us in a circumstance getting render and not offer a little margin of one has to take the versatility to making the events that being obscure disaster best indicates left lack of trust in itself and the fear that Christ is left fears for its own uncomfortable position, a critical voice will integrate into the system ready first nothing no true, let's take Christ is serious with that evolution, but it's something inevitable that has to chance to be fully exploited like Christ in our painfully dangerous they are intellectual in that they are the train which battles have to be waged, and one fidelity to the communist idea is key to revolutionary politics. It is a necessary ethical move in the face of liberal capitalism, the ideological embrace of the hedonistic utilitarianism and the ToC. The local communities have to believe in it to see it. All theoretic of the commercial gives to believe in it to see it. The truth is like something that can only engage against the atheist. Somebody believes in it, able to see there can be no amendment available for non-engaged objectives over the descriptions of the state of things that fails to journey against certain facts only rather than burden lifestyle or oppressed or struggles against the legal order and the ideological investigation which contains the ancient truth, the struggle, and then the means better to take the risk and engage fidelity, truth, many women, and to get actually not to mention the events of filtering his driver the last one of duty risk and actually the ideology of victim with the direction of politics for avoiding the worst of pronouncing all possible parts of the pursuing the least bad option and also leads to the price we pay and for survival our lives, and fidelity to the communist idea undermines the totality of the little capitalist world order which you check 1. A true Leninist is not afraid to pass to the actors and the consequence of realizing his parts of the left shirt the actual price we paid and prefer to keep your hands clean on the false radical left position, the Leninists of thinking and the fully assuming the consequences of choice to be fully aware of what and actually needs to take power to exert the repeated oneness of the gesture initiating political and the project undermines the totality of the goal of the world, the capitalist world order, and the approach of that would not eventually sort itself acting on behalf of truth and resisting the reliance on economic valuation is the ultimate ethical responsibility of the current social order guarantees social solution on a global scale. She's only 4. Our ethical responsibility to confront the advancing global capitalism and naturalization of landscape subjected into the world to create a universal global system that forces capitalists to the political discourse amounts of the construction through design and gentrification of that system capitalists reproducing depends upon this balance that excludes the world's population. The liberal ideology comes to naturalist capitalism representing outcomes as a matter of chance human cost in terms of inherent global poverty rate left chance can be calculated within the system of rational investigation that 5 capitalist prime capacity just its own excess and negativity and universal primary ethical directive around the fact that our forms of social existence are found on a solution on a global scale and will not conceal the fact that reduce the status of the object of that of which the otherwise not matrix and the ideology of capital structures and causes the impacts of the catastrophes that they will outline only the act until the effects you gave. Objective balance still finding shade of the capitalism party to solicit the spectre of this and monster that receives the passage regarding any human environmental concerns and ideological obstruction of the promise of the extraction of real enterprise sense of determining the structure of the material and social process of the fate of the culture of the population. Whole question to decide by the anti capital runs to show that price of TV real estate loans get actually much more candy than they do pre-directly capital social ideological wants this balance is no longer truly concrete individual the equal intention but it's purely objective system and economics that reveals the spectral logic capital that terms will focus on social reality just matter what matters is this situation become a preoccupation with subjective flashpoints file should be rejected. It creates a stopgap which prevents criticism of the root cause and response. Only the action alone can produce effective politics against capital ToC. At the forefront of minds are acts of commentary criticism of arrested international problems, but we should step back to disentangle ourselves from fascinating, literal, visible subject amounts. We need to perceive the contours of the background and generate such an inverse subject amounts and just the most visible there. This is the dynamic amounts or often catastrophic consequences of the produce functioning economic political system and the generation amounts can be perceived from the same standpoint as the amounts experiences a perturbation of the normal peaceful state of things subject amounts precisely the amounts inherent in the normal state of things even have to access urging overturn by clear political consideration. There are reasons for looking at the problem amounts around the lower boundary part of it and accidentally with the victims and their function lower trances from thinking in space is key should this time. There's something about particular outer space within imagination and imagery space that take part in the construction of social event, imagination, and creativity within the natural space created through the imagery space shall combined in our space and social within the image. Our space was the terrain, the possibility that operates outside of the world is its capacity to imagine another possible world creates a terrain where it becomes possible to work towards the creation of another world outer space and open a possibility from which other realities become possible. Outer space operates as an effective means creates a space for engagement with the issues through much more the boss the notion of possible looking level you might can actual imaginary recomposition, the process the process of making kind of the where becomes possible to build spacious capable navigating upon the earth and cancer for all there which is that part from the goes to the airplane and slave modern capitalism. The plan is a necessary subtraction from the state. So supplementing state, militarism, total utopia withdrawal from the state are both apolitical, only preferring not to allow the state to inject capitalism into space, convert to the bounds of totalitarian state structure. You check 9. Since the cultural revolution signals the failure to abolish the state is the alternative to accept the state as the apparatus which take care of servicing the goods and to operate at a distance from the origin more active, the machine into abstraction for the hegemonic field, which simultaneously finally creates into the field, reducing into the middle difference. It is abstraction which finally affects the field subtly, really bears true for awareness, determining national hegemonic field, bringing out the underlying publicity of the opposed, both the concept of the end use of the long, such hierarchical order state, how that every revolutionized order, history principles, constants of revolutionizing answers to the problem deadlock, on so solution of failure, communist state party politics above all primarily failure, and then the state politics which should be to and make the state itself work and not state the alternative is false one should repeat the lesson of the line of state and revolution of the global revolution wants not to take over state power but to transform radically change against functionally party with the dictatorship of culture line of state of something radically transform the form stands for more than just communes in space. Instead, our particular demand is a politicized embrace of the communist impulse. This act of metaphor condensation is a means of global opposition to ideology. Capital G 99. A public part is focusing on particular man, so the situation is politicized when it stands for function of metaphor condensation, global opposition against them. So the particular actually just about the demand and the about the universe mentioned that rest and the particular man will plus law stands for it. This is a metaphor of universalization. The particular man supposed to mobilize the mass apparatus and actors produces a world demand of it just the set demand with the particular economy, something equal to use work to the rational whatever.
Wait, do you support the communist hypothesis or not?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so what's the point of this last card? It says that it's a metaphor for something else.
Yeah, the plan is a metaphor for
for
movement.
communist hypothesis, that's fine. This Zizek 9 card. This card is in the context of the dangers of state-based politics.
Okay, so yeah, the card says that there are a few ways to go about subverting capitalism. One is to act outside of the state, to have individual movements. He says that fails.
Where does it say that fails?
One vertical.
Read any line that says that fails.
Okay. Simultaneously back there. No, that's the one.
Okay, that's fine. More importantly, let's talk about this one. This evidence
Here we go. Revolution signals the failure to abolish the state is the alternative then to accept the state as the apparatus which takes care of servicing the good and to operate at a distance towards it. Or
no, he's talking about the cultural revolution.
Yeah. No, he's talking about revolution. So
it literally says since the cultural revolution. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how you share part. The reference is by
individual
repeating the Leninist gesture. What is the Leninist gesture?
David. What is
the Leninist gesture?
The Leninist gesture is the embrace of communism while transforming the state. The reason all other movements failed in the past is because...
Wait, Lenin transformed the state?
Yeah, he attempted to. The reason his movement failed...
Do you know how the Russian Revolution happened?
Yes, obviously, he took over the state and transformed it. There are two reasons that failed. The first is that as opposed to transforming the function of the state, he attacked the state itself, which created an authoritarian regime. The second is the fidelity argument. Badu and Zizek both indicate that fidelity with the struggle is necessary for the struggle.
Interesting. What does fidelity mean?
Fidelity means that when anything is going bad, we maintain the struggle against capitalism, so we don't make concessions to it. We just continue along.
So we shouldn't make concessions to capitalism.
Our argument is that in the past, the reason why these struggles have failed is because of concessions that were made, and so only sticking in this.
So your Shukat evidence says, quote, the emergence of a radical future is defined by its route through the world, right? A radical future. Your plan text says that the United States federal government should develop a commons in outer space beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Would you call that a radical future?
Yeah.
How is that a radical future?
So
when in the context of the OSG, space is already declared in terms of commons, i.e. the moon cannot have bases on it, all those things.
Yeah, well, the OSD, first of all, doesn't really enforce that well. Also, the Cicadus card says that we can, if we look at space as something that can be shared and conceptualize it in a different way that has been...
Where does it say anything about sharing space? This Cicadus evidence is all about... Okay, my understanding of Shuka's card is just about probably down there.
Cicadus says the reason space is necessary to provide
Let's talk about your
because it engages the others
evidence.
other.
What does it mean to become a body of truth?
Become a body of truth. Badu says that we need to identify communism as the truth of that and maintain fidelity of that. Even 5 persons, which ironically is us, in the living room anywhere, is the site of politics.
Alrighty, 3 off case. 3 off case, not 3 off case.
All sorts of fun there.
There you go, Noah. Top dog. Actually, I'm going to change out.
What's that?
The shooting expando. Just there. Impacts.
Ready?
Yep.
Why you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in a good name?
Thank you.
Alright.
First up, the next
exploration requires physical travel, let's say through making display, find space exploration, place exploration, requesting space travel, discover the nature, university energy involvement requires construction technology, TO 10, almost comprises technical analysis development programs, including database invest, new aeronautics and space transport tech, critical moments, they exploit the elements just by hand, establish any illegal regime in states to observe space from Earth in any means, voting fairness education out, critique. First, the links. A, the common area just simply can use a majority world domination, so-called equitable distribution, is still processing to encourage involvement in resource exploitation, advanced capital destruction of environmentally significant regions. Franks 3. Developed nations interpret the common area rules allowing for the common use while holding traditional constitutions of freedom with the seas and not the freedom of exploration of business and technology explain nations. This is a way you can account the interests of growing nations with the distribution. Benefits will be determined by developed nations. Developed nations want economic benefits to be distributed in their favor. Developing nations are the internal committee. Vice versa for prevention. Common area to areas developing nations are not. For conservation, the international law reproduces global higher increases totally useless in the face of empire which will never implicate itself. Part negative 4. Legal restriction prior to stable framework for legislation, national, international, like Romania, like validation of illegitimate violence, international law consistent with treason, institution emerging to punish the illegitimate violence, will be in the ultimate national, international law, whereas international laws extend the recognition of national sovereignty, no justice, and restriction of the rights of sovereignty people, they will aim for Jewish sexual practice where the violence should be leaders exercise the law, use something says the ship the signal of the rights of repeal of national laws, this is where the violence of the struggle over the weak institution of repeal, justice, reproduce, political hierarchy, American party power make it possible to establish equality before the law. We need to look at the structure of the reality of single structures and see, focus on spaces, the object of imagination. Results in psychic detachment, and makes it impossible to engage with structural violence on Earth. Guard time. Now, spiritual human space becomes it's not only physical, this is detachment, psychic detachment, while orientation becomes observers, not participants. Seriously, from this as military organization, sexual assault, equality, CEO, and children, proposal, tax weights, and their species, direction, this perspective, like this, I'm waiting for understanding just from like legal justice solution, this is God's idea, for people, Earth, this is having their sportsmen, fear not Earth, and key, fidelity to that means nothing without action, a lot of 9. The government of expense by making the rest of the intellectual ability and appears of true translation. There's 3 just with the inequalities of market the world or product of the vicious society classes of the exploitative productions. Foundation is where it is impossible to overcome the inequalities of late years. Resolving this fundamental contradiction, these inequalities cannot be overcome with revolution, but do requires from the transformation of work, never ending new world proletarian revolution. And we will not allow the revolutionary struggle to be blackmailed by the affirmatives prediction of disastrous violence in the face of the affirmatives critique bourgeois reformers and we assert that we are not afraid of catastrophe. First, all wars are not winning by the peers while the communist parties if we die. Someone in the capital is 155. Today's world will come from more Mars, we don't want the will strike back people will not become by the US and having like bombs or so power. They don't through the earth, they'll hardly need anything for the US or people. The one source of result of War I, capitals were right, brothers, World War II, line wars were returned to the world. So the elimination of really class wars, and the communist parties of the revolution, the Shinu Yang War, the two from the facility, the revolution is not key party requires violent struggle, alternatives embrace. Finally, exuberance of revolution makes new ones of social production possible. Mod 27. The ridiculous of old climates and wars, the tax and fashion, those violence, survivors, repairs, the ejections, and you all need to join who wants your public money, passage supply, even though the press people said nobody can deny the word terrible change, but it is not terrible. Change not the police of revolution, can have them support, beating the Senate counter revolution, they fight treachery, demand contribution, they smash their citizens, consume. That's what some people call going too far, tyrants and observe the messages. Most violent revolts have created the place where tyrants are perpetuated, the worst outrageous. Revolution is not a dinner party, cannot be refined. Revolution is violence while using the race force, the message cannot possibly overthrow landlords. Not going too far, voice the landlord theory must firmly oppose it. And the revolution is not a choice, the insurrection is coming so by its own revolutionary impulse. The only choice is how we align ourselves with negative politics and entrenchment against empire to resonate as the revolutionary rhythm and divide the God prosperity and herald a new era, the invisible community 9. Revolution reigns by residents and directions out of force, right? The shape of music, which multiple points, space, and time and place for 16 opposing the earth, where its own vibrations always seek more density. When they return to normal, they will close again, now that their own side of all crisis means to govern. The most around us returning to heart, trying to listen, they go out of the government to the national election, the transitional influence will never make the distances will come to the subject of promotional organization obstacles, working the unresolvable to begin by suffering practically their existence, the materially organized and survival, so organized material for tactics, citrus, capitalism, problems of extreme alienations, entire anthropology, we are warned. Much like battlegrounds for being as we come of victory from the struggles of sharp. Because we can every person keep that intentions are behind. Every act that actually calls for youth will be the first establishing component of power. Everything that gives us a social movement lost is not finished decomposing the streets. No monopoly will continually line so the winding demand something persists. Points to refer to Sunday question of providing a schema of instruction but keeping the possibility of embarrassing. We should never should see so vital impulse of youth as the soul space that guarantee the essential rates we create only tends to fire. Next up is death call. A, the warning stage introduction to death connects the debates about one trivialization, death of any causes, a slight fascination with the spectacle of death is transmitted to death cult denies, twisted by death and exposure at 93. Death of vain reality thinks of the mask of rationality that many cells, many separate human objects of contemplation, but self-annihilation, which the creative experience of destruction, society, let's do this, very form of rational thinking in some of this culture, that point of tribulation, produce the experience of the rational administration of unlost age, flooding finalities, to his body concept of eating, reduce people's lives to mere numbers for debaters to consume, their game vulture, and I everyone is susceptible to death, the soul's able to neutralization, blood flow swing, reduce and quantify death, and I think the decision was dropped, the side of the live, the social media, your death is conceded, you're known, your death, but it's like completely neutralized, becomes inscribed in the rules of calculation, planning program system is possible, operated as a social service on the side of planet B, because they have introduced that from next to debate country age. Within the educational setting that has to know how and when, just to be reducing should not be done unless death interpreting its every significant nuance of events and cause all who dealt with the meaning of life. See, this is a gateway argument about how we should be allowed to debate when we can use death impacts and the rest of what he applies. We don't want to make classification from other flows to prove the like case. The act is a double frame. The very act of declaring space as a commons introduces the notion of instrumentality to the event vote negative to achieve true fidelity in assuming 9. This language is the contrast of intensity of the shadow of actions, instrumentality, functionally, potential, versus the someone the aesthetic extent to the creative intention, conscious of characterization, versus the very external solution is determining how related virtual and spatial specificity, self-informing the situation of the event of potential, flexibility to multiple bodies is happening in study public space, nothing shared events support the solutions not to resolve the tension but through your choice, modulating the symbiosis across the solution, with the plus intensity event coming together. 2, there is nothing but one, the one you see dimensions of which the space is the non-place, capital C risk of solvency, and 3, often includes only reimagination matter 0 defense of commons in space kind of sign. The emergence of radical future communist there is always necessary defined by the evidence of one of the versions we struggle to question, not whether they're communist partisans, other political war can be gained, conventional human essence of relation to them, and here's more evidence you kind of sign. Within the dimensional space created by the image of space, we're going to find outer space, social movement, the image of space, was a terrain possibility, the capacity to imagine other possible worlds, it's a terrain which becomes possible to work towards the creation of another world. Back to
No, keep your case, yeah.
And if they say they know the bet, they're not, they do 98. What else return would be the ordinary truth is where you present the effect of what is particularly the situations of neutrality being not that teaching hard space wall and national sense of the people for all the a signal cannot regulate distributing of the universe on the one close particularly at action set now this may be so they can then mass or asking the point under the image that the truth is often rather than position the struggle is all affected interruption ethics of truth to presume the signal of vibration naming and reputation but in race well community works directly against truth but others make them exercise the terror evil to smart system healing from truth as an earning of intelligence terror dark and never run and what does it say? Locking their ethics within the state dooms solvency makes it possible to become body truth, but do 5. Among the benefits of harder to say, well, the power that state constructs to say the situation where truly political beneficiaries are considered about the dimension, is a possibility of the function of the state remaining without the function of the political plus the state. This is the political will bring in work of politics, forget the state, the other and maximum combined. It's a state that the state can put a discipline reaching calculation or egalitarian logic not conversion, and so in the state's budget.
Also, they can't anticipate your truth because they
can't
external.
Because they see it as external?
No, they exert action for external agency.
Exactly, their action for external agency.
Yeah, that's good.
Process.
Alright, what's the status of the 2 alts?
There's not 2 alts, there's 1.
What?
There's 1
Oh,
alt.
there's 1 alt.
It's what? Unconditional?
Unconditional. Alright, yeah, let's go through your link arguments. The first one is about common heritage in space. The math is, I think this card is talking about if we took all of space and just said everything in space is common heritage. The planet is just one project, which is distinct from that.
Well, first of all, tell me the plan text. I know it's your process.
The plan text is
the
plan text is to develop a commons in space.
So develop like one sector of space. I don't think one's all for jack nothing.
Okay, well, does that mean, okay, well, we can address that question later. Does that mean this first link doesn't apply?
No, that card is in the context of the way that commons are developed for international institutions. It says that it's always going to be developed in a way that benefits the dominant countries, the already developed countries, because they're the ones that are developing it. In the context of your app, the U.S. unilaterally declares an international law.
Okay.
Like obviously they would use it to further the interests of U.S. Corporations, U.S. imperialism, and that's what you're going to do.
The second link, international law.
Sure.
So is that based also off the U.S. acting? I'm not really sure.
I mean, no, okay, that argument is based on Hart and Negri's thesis about how you may explain that, or are you getting that before I go into the actual
No, okay, how do you,
essentially,
how do you get to this?
Yeah, they say that your use of like international law, which is what declaring things as a commons is.
Wait, how do you use international law? The plan puts something up into space and then anybody can show.
What does the plan do? Put the plan. What?
Your plan puts nothing in space.
What? We put a project into space that anybody can share. That's what we've been saying.
You put a commons in space.
Yeah, that's a common.
Do you know what the common?
That could be like a satellite that anybody can share, or international space.
That is not the app. Dude, that is not what you plan. I would love to
figure out something. Alright, then I think we're getting into
last time I checked, I'm pretty sure the app gets to define what we do. Okay. Alright. Third link, the one about the Earth, not focusing on the Earth. we've read multiple cards that focusing on struggles on the Earth fails because like a history of failure, and then we need to look at space in the place. So
no, the reason that fails is because we're always pushing our interests through the state, through other reasons.
Wait, no, there have been movements on like an individual scale, like the protests against the World Trade Organization.
Those didn't go far enough.
What?
Those movements didn't go far enough.
Okay, so
If you go farther.
okay, how does the alternative go further?
Because the alternative is an embrace of revolutionary violence, whatever it takes.
But who's doing that? Like, how does that movement? How does that message get out?
What? But I don't
How
understand.
does the message of the alternative get out? Like,
I mean, I don't think it's a
state
question of
action-
alternative
state
still,
action-
especially in the context of the inevitability cards we've read. But I think it's a question of the way that we ideologically endorse retro
Yeah, you can join a revolution if you
Yeah.
want. You can join a revolution.
Okay.
Straight down the system.
And why can we have a revolution on an individual scale and have the state work towards that revolution?
Because that's not a revolution. Read them out, Karen.
Yeah, and that's not a Maoist-Leninist gesture, which Yoshida is talking about. He's literally referring to breaking with all social order when he says that is the Leninist gesture.
It is.
Where do you want the name?
Yeah, you can put it over there on the chair.
Alright.
You got to run the sheets. Other.
Once you guys get that, I think that'll be okay.
What was it?
Once you guys get the ToC, then.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What's called speech to AC 49? Starts with we, me, they.
Yeah. Actually, can I take one more second? Oh, 7:55 left. I mean, sorry,
Minus 5 seconds.
minus 5
Okay.
seconds, yeah. I started at 8. Whoops.
You said 15.
Alright, cool, thanks.
Say more.
I didn't give an order to space. It's going to be T, case, common heritage, K, fluid period.
No, it is, because computer doesn't have Word.
You could probably open it as an internet document.
Could you?
Yeah, I did that when somebody said.
Oh, that's speech 2AC, sorry. Speech 2AC for the internet. No.
Here, go back. Right click. Open. Yeah, try that.
You can use text edit.
Hopefully the Firefox thing works.
That'd be awesome.
Wait,
Oh, wait.
huh?
No, just make me download it.
No.
It's fine. We'll just use one computer.
You sure?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
You're fine. Here's the.
Maggie, you ready?
Yeah.
What's your order?
Order is T, case, common heritage, K, code period.
We call it now.
Sure.
Wow, and then default.
Okay. Ready? Top County, one way meet the artificially defined plan, whatever the definition says, develop, we can use to develop e-coms, it's not creating framework for comms. We create tangible things that are used communally. For an example, would be a new ISS or loop-based cross-section to clarify this. We are not BCC's Common Heritage Act. We establish a common space and cat jurisdiction, space development, loop-based structure, SUITA, and all five. Space development, potential loop-based, or loop-based structure. This interpretation comparatively better. A, predictability, most commonly. A, definition of development doesn't split the top limits. B, affects never every aspect, so no multi-process, no influence, creating leading frame for buildings, after that, launching them. The plan actually develops space, multifaceted education, where you learn about multi-frameworks for space development, social political systems that accompany them. Indeed, functional abstract, substantial, and international categories would mean what they're worried about would never happen. Competing interpretation, arbitrary cause limitations, about artificially excluding the reason, but we don't make debate possible. It's not reason, but that's arbitrary self-serving and construction convention. Now, on 2 they say double term because we use space the common term for no link. We are not BCC's Common Heritage Act. I explained that, but we establish common space, which means the U.S. develops something, puts it up into space, and then we say everybody has access to. That includes the aliens, the transhumans, and everybody on Earth that wants to go there, and whoever on Earth doesn't want to go there is considered a capitalist and the enemy in the revolution.
Instrumentality does not deny fidelity.
And instrumentality does not deny fidelity or GJ have to indicate that you have to alter, have a state function, alter, make the state working non-state mode in order to solve. Because if you, that's just a subtraction argument, if you use movements that entirely make the state, that fails because those movements will be overthrown by state in all fair. And if you use movements that fully embrace the state, that causes things like authoritarianism, that is non-authentic act. They say no sovereignty, however, we do self-fidelity. Our GJ can do evidence indicate that creating communism with truth, then maintaining fidelity, that's not essential self because any concern for consequence that stem from that is a bad thing because it causes a stopgap which prevents us from engaging criticism and capitalizing the defense of the common however, we create a tangible thing or shake acceptance indicates that we have to go into space and engage the other, destroy the other. That means whatever is in space, we don't know what's up there, but the only reason that we have to use space is because it would not be seen as a rearrangement of the present world. It would be seen a new world that creates the space for imagination, for struggles against capital. The population will be able to see that communism can exist and it's not just a capitalist world in which communism always fails. They say, we are not the event, you are right, we are not the event, but do evidence indicates identifying communism as truth, but maintaining fidelity to that struggle is essential. We are in a 5-person room, and starting the base of politics here is essential to do so. They say the state dooms and however I explain, GJ subtraction argument above, and they say no one truth because of action is external action is good. I explain GJ argument above, also more beyond the K. K. Doesn't link first international law. The plan does not establish spaces of commons, etc. The U.S. develops a common space, a tangible thing. It can be a new ISS, a new lunar base, etc. We get to define what we do. The plan takes distinct from BCC's established spaces of commons or common heritage. We establish a commons in space. 2. Imagination. Cicadas. In terms of this, the only way for the revolution to succeed is to maintain imagination. The idea if we attempt any revolution, revolution on the ground, it would just be seen as a rearrangement of the present world trace of the struggle possible. 3. But do Zizek remedies this by altering the hypothesis for subtraction state. We are not a violent revolution, however, we are still a revolution. All the capitalists that oppose the communes do not get to go up into the communes, and we oppose the formalities like our formalities like
claims war and subtraction by violent revolution is a bad thing. That arguments about rejecting politics as the alternative and then that's a Zizek they refuse to take politics they include multiple arguments, say subtraction total, refuse to take politics says nothing, challenge domination, only picking third option of decreasing the state's bill to do violence and restrict the state K9. It is impossible to state that we say, are we not agreeing with the fact 2 weeks ago that the true test should be made the state word non-stable, the alternative is false. The goal of revolutionary violence to take over state power, transform negation, traditional order by capitalist disorder must in itself be negated, resulting in a determined negation distinct from the starting point. And be a case of this the alternative cannot solve capitalism. Zizek, some critics call urges state power withdrawing from its terrain. This is the opposite of accepting triumph of capitalism, politics resistant, and demoralizes supplement thirdly left. C space is necessary to guarantee the space to imagine new possibility of the communist project space and less to engage. The other truly that was a case of interfere of viable options, the truth function ideology, the alternative attempts are revolt only sides have the political possibility of universal emancipation. We should instead remain resolved to pursue the politics of one K9, Zizek, which is to be invention and role, is transfers on virtual states, basically leaves one truly only monster potential is easy. I depend the best of our inner selves in, on the basis of which politics reduce negotiation of interest, this steps to cowardly resignation, Zizek, changes virtual basically these potential merciful shuffles, organized by the part of no part only, such an incumbent institution, new order that organizes databases of the exuded implementation, do both solve best, double solvency does matter, it's the ultimate ethical responsibility. That's our Zizek and happens to be combining the state with things like war movements. It gives us better access because the state itself can be transformed into lack of specific administration for use of short-term and their ability to be progressive. Their choice of politics is a symptom of depoliticized politics, not necessity. Zizek 8. The 2005 revolt and out of the no particular made by the protesters only insistent recognition based on personal law. They were protesting in the reaction to the protest. We have a violent protest which demands nothing from the protesters or in the way produced bare survival. People in worse material issues have been organized themselves as political agents who declare what kind of university we have the only option to democratic consensus acting at the opposition system not to take the meaningful and utopian project is a great illustration of our predicament and the alternative cannot solve the case. The act must occur within this ball field that serves the communist idea must convene the politics of state dean by genuine political acts and agreement position of social system and all that idea is a sort of like one field served by an act and agreement standpoint of the instructional principle. Look, the only question that you have to resolve to debate is whether or not the state is beneficial for a capitalist revolution. We think it is, and if you do, it's a reason to vote affirmative. Vote here. One framework compare the hypothetical and admin plan council, actually, back to the coming here to Che. One framework compare the hypothetical and admin plan policy option to the plan. The difference, bad news, when you see rent, even vast be showing the level of collapsing, have that B plan focus necessary to preserve our top education. Otherwise, the base sense of truth issues we can't generate often against C reciprocity. They get to move to 1AC, we get to move to 1C, so permitted the all. Budget. The last three paragraphs should be required to say the price of peripheries are created by the desire to consume, i.e. we want them in Africa to maximize resources and all the crises are the result of the desire to consume. There evidence talk about when we talk about big catastrophes, that is not unique. We create catastrophes in order to maintain capitalism and status quo, and we don't understand structural lines of the real catastrophe. That's what the plan criticized. We are the discourse of the impending real catastrophe. Our impacts are about those subjugated in the system of capital, not debt on a massive scale. In reality exists in TS7. Poetry is not really that teacher similar to the way the technical is making fun of the argument reality is an illusion. Reality exists, social problems and oppression also exist just as we are some over for poetry jargon instead of prose conceal the absence of intelligible arguments. It's easy to poke fun with them, and their scholarship is wrong. No base for defensive simulation arguments or offensive trying to know bad arguments. Gilman on policy 10. Poetry is working full midterm things about the goals of Lindsay did is multiple church and cried out concern the effort press people's fight for out of his positions of reality and text and recommends a political philosophy. Poetry's work declares the involved political conceptions of collective action and their criticism realized in the alternative fails in 1998. Baudrillard's unable to provide critical alternative hyperreality clear depend on what the intent of opposing has any effect sensitizes the reader to the media culture. Baudrillard wants to resist the packing system makes hyperreality grow, denies it denies developing alternative knowledge which undermine media representation because it serves these visions will already be hyperreality. It's not enough to say false reality or much try to reconstruct reality in which critique is possible and their reality is self-defeating both from 91. Hyperreality, discourse critique becomes another construction of reality. The game is all up there in line with what it's not. Positional form simulation then, the subject of the radical action then, transform the alternative then, capitalism the cause of death, capitalism the cause of the death of the Zizek indicate the only people that are valuable system capital are those that can produce, those that are not are labeled permanent losers and die. Things like the sweatshops in China and slums in India. Those people always die. Focusing on mass scale death is nothing capital outweighs Zizek indicates subordination capital is the ultimate ethical responsibility. Zizek indicates capital structures reality because the way we view reality is irrelevant because the real is motivation, the coordinates the real is motivation, the coordinates structure reality. Capital is self-check monster that pursues past spreading through environmental concerns. If we do not address the coordinates from which it operates, we cannot solve any of the impacts the alternative the impacts the criticism have.
We'll take a second for that.
We're not.
Okay, stop that. Josh, 21 seconds used?
Yeah, you're gonna say that.
Alright.
Alright. Go back to the count cards.
Oh, okay, so yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Alright. Like, all these cards, I'm pretty sure are out of context. Like this card, the GX7 card, is like when critics on the postmodern left call for a new politics of resistance outside of the state. Zizek does say that, but he proposes as the alternative a violent revolution that directly clashes with the state.
No.
Tell me, read me one of these cards, or any one of these cards.
The main card that you're referring to is the 1AC Zizek 9 evidence. It indicates that when you either fully engage the state or revolt entirely against the state, absent changing its true function, you cannot win. Because in the first world, where you fully embrace the state, it caused things like authoritarianism and stopgaps, which prevent engaging true citizen capital. The second is the violent revolution that your alternative proposes, that disengaging the state. The reason he says that fails is because when we disengage the state, it's of such great power.
These cards are not in the context of a revolution against the state. These cards, like,
it's not about a
point me
revolution
up.
against the state. It's
That's
about
what our
transforming.
alternative is.
Right. The cards are not about a revolution against the state.
Or
They're
revolution
about
against
no. They're about transforming the function of the state to create a struggle against capital. The reason fiat is so important in this affirmative is because we are able to make the state work in a non-statal mode.
What?
Wait.
Yeah, we make the state work in non-statal mode. It is
Okay,
unrealistic to assume that the United States...
David,
yeah,
alright.
what's up?
Okay, so after all these cool new 2AC specifications on T and stuff,
Those
Like,
are
why doesn't, like-
specifications. The plan text's written that way. You could have asked an NC
All right.
process and we would have defended that.
whatever you want to call them, why doesn't the ISS solve? Like, it
Why-
seems like we
few
do cooperative
reasons.
stuff
Yeah,
in
few
space
reasons.
now.
For a few reasons. The ISS does not solve because it does not engage everyone on the Earth. We do not take up anyone who wants to go there. That is one reason. That is not a true communal area. Second, the reason we engage our partners on the ISS is to create better trading relationships with them because otherwise they'd be pissed because they're not included. That's sustaining the system capital. The third reason the ISS doesn't solve is because it's not open to allowing all beings to go there. If aliens exist, the ISS would not let them on board. They'd probably try to shoot them down.
Okay, so explain to me how we're going to get everybody that wants to go to space to the
That's
space
the
station.
point of the app.
Like
It's
how-
a utopian imagination. The affirmative...
But I thought we need specific demands, not
The specific demand is creating the communism of space. The utopianism of the app is that it allows everybody who loves communism and hates capitalism to go up there. Everybody who's like,
So,
this
so
doesn't
okay, so
work,
the
it's
government
capitalism.
gets rid of everyone who doesn't like capitalism, puts them up in
Yes.
space, so for like free capitalist reign on Earth, is that what
Whoever
happens?
wants to go, yeah. That allows everybody to imagine the possibility of a communist world. Cicadas indicates the reason that stuff like that is impossible on Earth is because it's seen
So
as a
really what this
progressive
critique
world.
is like, let's take all the communists, everyone doesn't like capitalism, put them in space out of sight so
They
the
want to,
capitalists
yeah.
can continue to do whatever they want on Earth.
The Earth wouldn't be completely capitalist, they would change the Earth too.
Wait, how?
The cicadas indicate to create the space for imagination to allow us to change the Earth.
Yeah, you're talking about.
Yeah, I do.
Thank you.
Anything you have?
Yeah.
I'm gonna run the direction, just make sure the cyber camera. Okay.
10 years. My dad took them. Oh, God. The order is going to be case, then the K.
Which one?
The only K.
Alright, so now.
Is there a way to, I'm not really familiar with here, hands, like pull this out? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. I think the computer goes on this part. Right?
Yeah.
I'll put the computer on there. Pretty sure that's how we're going to do all that
Okay.
I haven't really talked about it.
Too soon, too soon.
Too soon. Too soon. I saw the shattered screen, I was just like, no way this conversation's going to go on. Wait, one more turn. We're talking about this after.
Yes, exactly.
Now I can feel the map still be broken then.
Right, true enough. Love it. Stop it, come up and grab it. Right, ready?
Yep.
This affirming thought having space key word structure could have evidence is explicit that there, it's actually in the context of their scripts, and their evidence does not say that space is a mechanism to change, rather it's making the argument for a radical imagination. Their warrant for that is that they assume that it's impossible to create real politics on Earth. If we win the thesis of our criticisms that we are not totally damned on Earth, and that is a reason why we excel our offense, all this imagination, why space is key is the exact internal link to our Earth. First is which they can see on criticism I'll get to later now. The idea of space is demoralizing as space, and virtue is necessarily demoralizing because it's for your salvation outside the atmosphere. Even if they inject criticism into the system from a collective imagination, that's what makes real politics and change impossible, because you are always necessarily impossible to make your own sensitivity. This is the direct internal turn your body of truth arguments, because it proves that the only way you have a body of truth is to actually be actualized in your idea of what is truth. Therefore, that between the notion that truth can only obtain external to yourself through the atmosphere is a direct link turn to the one is used in voting and perception. Now, I've conceded from assuming evidence that the most effective means to obtain politics is actually affect by knowing through the manner of the political resistance. If we win the thesis of the criticism, they are right that we are just 5 people in the room. So if we win the thesis of the criticism, i.e. that a form of a violent revolution, and at least in the context of the debate round, is not preferable, that is a reason to vote negative. There's your two individuals necessarily forming a new form of ideology through state politics. They are external to themselves as a direct internal link turn to their body of truth arguments. More importantly, their idea of using the state itself as an expression of desire for mastery that's anchors, and so all the desire for mastery differs from juxtaposition between desire for freedom and conditions of political parlance. Citizens are excluded from national politics, many consumers, individuals see unable to experience or freedom identification with aims to adjust the experience by verbally overcoming them. The identification with seed action realized expectation mastery of the autonomy of the social world, independence of any sort is considered unfreedom, so that in a sense where the individual is bold, state action be seen as one place where strong autonomy is not possible. Now the criticism is able to outweigh the case they conceded the thesis of our evidence of the struggle of life is insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. Either someone will be there to mourn our loss when we are gone, in which case the appearance is not all that bad at all, or we leave the universe silent when humanity is completely destroyed. Which means suffering is they are gone does not matter. That's our evidence, which the only thing that matters is the struggle, the moment, the moment is hand. You should live life. The excesses that Zizek and 3 we are alive only if you ignite yourself. The excessive intensity of what puts us beyond your life. We focus on survival, but suicide bomber belling himself more alive. And you have Gavin jungle and Hudson River to keep his body in shape. The aim is the thing happening. The thing's excess of life. What makes life worth living is the access of life. Only when we take risks, everyday soldiers are strong. My enemies must seek life in the spirit of fire. They know deference to desire like water. Drink death, death, line, fire, eternity. It's by the substance. The one I see. What you agree with that? The strategic evidence from FARS. There's pages 74, 76 that they read is about why the idea of denying catastrophe is bad, because it makes it real politics necessary and possible, which means they are always too short of a form of radical politics because they refuse to engage in the Leninist gesture that Zizek is talking about, which is exactly about revolution. Now we have several links. We want to see each of them as independent dissent and the reason to vote negative. I will isolate them at the top. The first is the common heritage links. Well, the notion of common heritage for mankind may be good in theory. You should ask yourself the theoretical viability of the project with regard to space. Who does it really protect? What does the statement that space is an area supposedly accessible to anyone? In actuality, it does nothing. First, it's based upon it only shares affect the interests of the ruling class. A competence space is nothing. Or the country without a space program, it's even actually better space. The second, it still maintains the idea of a resource exploitation outside of Earth. This internally turns all of their arguments about resisting capital because they still posit the universe as an object out there that's able to, as a research out there that is able to distribute or to claim, which means that is internally through the machine argument. It's a second link. That is our, Frank's argument. It's a second. It's a universal declaration of empire. The idea of the commons making good in the abstract when the politics comes from the declaration of a single unit to your body, i.e. the USFG, you should be suspect. This is the gesture that maintains the international order because politics and empire necessitate multilateral order to exert control. That's a hard neck guidance we must concede. Third is fidelity without action. The failure of duty and fidelity is that it assumes commitment is not all commitment is important. If the commitment is not backed up by proletarian revolution, it makes it impossible to articulate real change. This is a built-in hollow hope dissent. Their rotation because it proves that their form of political activism is naive and wishful thinking while they pat themselves on the back of balance of capital. Good change replicated but pushed on now. They have conceded our Earth first link while they're viewed detached from space and makes the planet. First, like psychic distancing, so we can say that we are not actually Earthlings at all. This goes strive with our ideas of political imagination, which is why they are not able to actually solve the problems on Earth. By all the violence that you see, and to the perfect means all their arguments about why you should look, why you get objective balance as opposed to subjective balance actually flows negative because it proves that their view from Earth attaches us from that. More evidence, Williams, and tell life described by the destruction of the biosphere. If we can experience that life, the problem is escaping them, how the ourselves people play, and do a self-fulfilling multiplier dream based solutions. The exit finders that this evidence actually in the context of trying to escape Earth, which is how the crossings of the Tweety characterize are affirmative about why letting the communists run away from the problem. Arguments that you shouldn't run from the problem, you should initiate violent revolution, or not a line to make the first argument that they developed the plan text says to develop a commons in outer space. A commons obviously refers to a form of common principle. We're the only ones with the evidence on this question, friends. And then through the revolving nation, they keep running the common air principle trees up street, but as the country pose it refused to comply with the principle looks on paper of undershaw laws is relegated to lofty academic concept that looks good on paper, but in practice, it actually fails. And even if they win this argument that there is just a single common project, our link is still specific to the idea of propping up their social system because the United States might have a space program, but the people of Uganda are much more concerned by the subjective balances, the objective balance that occurs to them rather than going into space, which means the hope for them is not escape, it's to actually live another day. It's exactly why our revolution is important today. The argument on instrumentality doesn't deny fidelity, but that is not true. The idea of fidelity, their entire argument is you must maintain an open commitment to the idea that perhaps when we work in the future arguments that commitment is not actively dedicated toward the form of revolution. It does not actually lead to political change. Now, to group the rest of the offense, the rest of the offense is the question of the alternative solids. The alternative is to embrace the mouse-less gesture of revolutionary violence, capitalism, a two-powerful system to be resisted to economic forms to prevent a break that only turbulent brings. That's our model evidence. We have the best empirics on our side. The only resistance that have actually ruptured capitalism, albeit momentarily, but they did rupture it, were forms of violent revolution. The reason why Stalin and Mao failed is not, the reason why they failed is not the violent revolution, it's that they stopped the revolution. They stopped resisting state politics, they stopped resisting the idea of collective concepts. That's why the worst communists of today are the Chinese, because it's the form of states made by the You should set the threshold for sovereignty for Assad in order to win. We don't need to, our impacts come from the revolution itself, not the utopian society afterwards. Zizek and to the proper revolution breaks the utopian future, neither simply present nor simply above. We're a new time law track as if the utopian future is running hand. Just be their revolution is that which is hardship, but it's the hardship which the point of future fighting has captured out already are free while fighting for freedom, already are happy while fighting for happiness. No matter how different the sense of revolution is its own ontological proof, and that's why they make the arguments of working with the state. There's Zizek evidence about you need a civic demand is not true because we always civic demand. We are a pure rejection of capitalism, which is important because capitalism is universal. Zizek and capitalism is not universal in itself. Universal for itself is for the extra power in our minds. But the world itself is cutting into capital all forces, critics of centralism, and you have to be capital resource or the public capital not secret with the fact. It really is the universal function of the society's critical system. Some integration to the articulation as possible of the universal function of the same terms of like the US or Peru or Saudi Arabia, or even more mentioned worth than everyone do something experience negativities and inadequacy. The from this revolution solidarity, to tolerate difference. It is not impact civilization, the struggle within access civilization, while unites the same struggle is shared. The share of our topic also small scale demands like different of the Zizek, and to the big media started warm about the Marxist manipulating the honest private sector organized momentum like a new Greenpeace, which should be limited to micro politics and organization in the form of party politics. Without politics, you want revolution without a revolution. They are only one extreme which like to mention universality. They do not relate to totality. They like to oppose racism. He contributes this without endangering the system itself. Now these are all dissents to the these are all dissents to permutation to prove. No sort of evidence failed. They're hard. They want to see the view out there. Zizek data evidence, page 128 of trade current politics. It says the dangers of state politics is the link to arousing the criticism. All the rest of evidence is very generic. One second, Brad. 10 seconds, or 20 minutes, sorry.
Cool. Let's talk about the Williams evidence. It seems to indicate that it's trying to establish things like colonies in space and permanent places of living.
Yeah, you're right, that's the context, you were right about the context of the article, but the portion that we are, that part is about the idea of using space as a means to escape social problems on Earth, right? Her criticism of space colonization is that it tries to escape the social problems on Earth, which is exactly what
Why
Rand
is the
does.
plan's utopian demand an attempt to escape problems of Earth?
Are you serious? The crossing to the ToC was...
Right, as opposed to creating an imagination
Excuse me.
for capital.
Excuse me, crossing to the ToC was explicit. Even Noah was like, are you serious that your alternative is all the good communists can run away because they're scared of capitalism?
It's not a matter of...
Our argument is that they shouldn't run away, they should fight capitalism. That's our argument. Right?
Let's talk about the anchor evidence. Why is the state impossible to fight capitalism? It seems like a full embrace of the state would, I would agree with your argument, but why would changing how the state functions be an impossible way of fighting capitalism?
Well, one, because dialectical materialism just like is opposed to states in the end, right? Because eventually Marxism means that there is no state. But more importantly, like the idea of this, like you're right, the state in the abstract, right? There's probably nothing necessarily bad about a state politics, but our argument is that the manner in which the state is being deployed now, only violent revolution is the mechanism to change that, right?
Okay, why is that true? Why can't
Because ideology.
Why doesn't fiat solve the reform of the state from internally? Why do we have
Because all your framework arguments, like we have to fiat the plan text. And like you do get to fiat the plan text. Good thing we have links to those, dude. We have links to the idea of common heritage, why that's only used as a
that's
mechanism.
not my question. My question is why is
Because
reforming the state
you're asking-
internally a bad thing?
Because here's the why. Here's the reason why. Our mouth is really good, even though it's in the context of like 1920 China. It's incredibly specific that says the way that capitalism operates is that it always entrenches the interests of the bourgeoisie, right? So there's always a form of laws or like legalities in place that maintain the interests of the ruling elite, which means that the only method to rupture that is to go outside of the system because it's already a rigged game when you work within it.
Hold on.
It's a rigged game where the reason that
why can't we reform how the system works?
because that has never worked, ever. The only times in history that capitalism has been challenged is Cuba, China, and Russia. Well, to my knowledge anyway, historically, right? Anything else is just proto-capitalism, right? Even if those regimes eventually collapse, the reason they collapse is because they stopped the revolution. Our argument is that the revolution is
They
the
didn't
endpoint.
maintain fidelity to the revolution.
Yeah, I know, but
We saw other consequences.
I agree, you should have fidelity to the revolution.
Right, so why wouldn't maintain fidelity to the revolution solve the reasons that those communist regimes failed? It seems like the reason they failed is because they paid attention to problems that arose from the revolution. We disregard all those problems and just maintain...
You don't. We have links to your see. Things like Earth First, the idea of fidelity in the abstract. First off, you shouldn't get a permutation. That'll be the one in R. Why terms are bad for this because it's about method. But more importantly, our argument is mostly that, like, because you have started out the idea of fidelity in the abstract, if that fidelity was not tailored toward revolution, it is bankrupt, right? It doesn't do anything. Like, all the do analysis of our locomotive evidence is explicit.
Wait, one second.
Alright, sorry, bye.
So, a little bit on the K, I guess I'm going to term
Okay,
and
hold on, I
framework.
gotta deduct your question. You have 5, 8. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, starting with term?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this probably forgotten part of your just need to grab it? You can give me 3 seconds. if you want. Alright, so perm, then framework on the K, and then the decimal version.
Alright, here we go.
Wait,
One second.
I'm sorry.
The perm on this wiki is on, the perm that is, oh wait, sorry, timer on, can I?
What is this one?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
So devastating. I was really excited and then I was not excited.
I will hopefully be comfortable.
The battery is
Oh, yes, it was.
no, it's just a magnet. It's a guy. Whatever. Just try my stuff. No, it's
It's
good.
all good.
Whatever. I don't need things. It's good.
Alright.
The firm of this critique is not sorry because the state should be about community methodology on the way we need their interpretation. We are politically relevant. Our interpretations that the affirmative must defend the pedagogical importance of their method prior to when they see this is best. We would follow our revolutionary thought and action as better medium to achieve social change. Working within the system, you should vote negative. How we warrant ourselves in broader political change is more important than specific instances you would. And one is after choice they've chosen to defend institutional reform as a method, despite the fact that they themselves are removed from this process to control better internal activism and assessment within the pedagogical space, which primarily assume that can be prioritized by political change and education over active political actions. And two balances method is good, but good federal is fine. Violence is inherent in social revolution. The press says people fight for revolution and no, but they're getting to the extent that worth of many things over the revolution. So I'm supposed to fight back like not following this rubbish thing. Fucking everyone's fighting like every calculation is accentuating what we say with power, but especially fighting back against this rich future text. This raise the cost of aggression and incurred by the rest of the media resistance of non-violence only makes it easier. Next, the police are in the defense of groups. The cops of the ones of the two cops for every purpose of the same. The moving your battle, the peaceful that can be barricaded by relatively small number of cops. Who then with the crime of their relationship can carry off the lumber targets one by one. Violence and personal politics come first to reliance on experts, and institutions outside their control is bad.
And permutation to the alternative settlements.
And permutation to the alternative settlements obviously voting issue because big example moving target we can't generate single orphans.
Yeah.
That's all. They have mishandled their critique. They are correct that our cards by Bozier, but they are not in the context of things like simulation or hyperreality. What their evidence is talking about, they do not compose being responsive to this argument. Don't let them try to recharacterize one as shady. This argument is explicitly tagged and explicitly flagged a prior gateway issue as a theory argument as to how we should act in the debate space. They've been trying to be shifty in all this way, saying that they do the plan wherever they want. They don't commit to doing it in a stable place, which means we can't generate not to be an independent voting issue. But don't let them shift on this. We blame their block strategy off of this. Some of them sandbag the 2 hours already. The hardest speech in debate. Now feel free to call for the shall. I read it verbatim. This argument is pretty simple. Georgetown read it in NDP finals. Essentially, this debate is fundamentally a game, but we have turned it into a game about the debaters' star cards and get excited when they count them with huge body counts instead of realizing the gravity of these arguments. They make the reaction. It allows us to gain actual pleasure from a real tragedy. The reaction to when they cut their cabinet tax is probably excitement, not disgust at the atrocities that happen. This celebration of death is empirically caused the worst violence in history. We become policymakers, whatever we become in the real world, we will be desensitized to death, and it will be impossible. Now, this critique says that essentially they use body counts as a currency in debate by which they can be traded in order to gain wins. This is the quintessential example of capitalism, which means that this argument is an internal relation to the inherited demand from death making causes massive violence over 80 cents per Solomon 2K. Bunch of intelligence simulated once more than 80 cents is where the city making death momentarily slightly increases hostility towards world subsequent humans, hostility towards violence. People with different requirements of primary psychological security respond to annihilation. Now I'll go to the line, but not much of this is responsive, but we'll try to get out of any 1 hour spin they're going to make on this. They say they say that they don't create catastrophes, but that is exactly what they're doing. They still use huge body counts. Even if they don't access it through a policy impact, they are still engaging in this logic. They would still be able to debate capitalism, whether or not capitalism is good or bad under our interpretation of debate. They would just have to talk about the way that capitalism hurts people structurally. This is not too much because it doesn't trivialize that. Even if capitalism does cause death, we're still able to do this. Anyway, the protest of capitalism is not legitimate. This critique is a pre-fiat question, which means the fact that they've read, I've seen them read econ impacts or hedge impacts and other rounds probably disproves the fact that their protest of capitalism is legitimate, and it's not just the logic of the death toll. Now the group that talks about reality existing, this does not make any sense in the context that we do not think a stance on whether or not reality is real. It probably is, but the debate is not. We can all agree that debate is not real. Nobody dies or lives based on the decision that you make in this round. So it's only a question of the way we approach things, which means that you cannot leverage the definition of the one who sees the prediction of reality against the critique. It's just a question of the way we orient ourselves, which means we have the only role in impact, because when we become actual policymakers, when we go out in life, we will always desensitize capitalism. The argument that capitalism is the root cause of death is precisely our argument. They just continue this logic, and they use capitalism. They use this in order to further interest in debate, and don't recognize that that's for how tragic it truly is. They say capitalism outweighs, but it is impossible. This doesn't make any sense. They cannot outweigh our impacts because this is a question of the way we actually orient ourselves, so not a question of fiat. How much time do I have left? The timer is
28.
28.
There's Zizek evidence about why capitalism allows for subjective violence.
There's Zizek evidence about why capitalism allows for subjective violence is the link.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they're not reading a policy internal link to this doesn't really matter. These distinctions are silly. It's a question of the way we approach debate.
they're writing into the same logic probably disproves all their tap worlds.
There's no argument made why we should reject the argument of the team.
There's no argument made as why we should reject the argument of the team.
It's a
This character is a theory argument, which means anything else we judge in direction, but we're going to more attractive.
How much stuff do you have left?
You said 7.
7:15.
Yeah, for sure.
It turned out to be there, so I didn't steal it, but.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, fair.
Yeah. So what's time with this, right? What's time with this, right? Alright, good.
Okay, 5:53.
We got this one, and we got.
I got, I'm good.
334.
Left, there it is.
Left.
Yeah, I agree.
This is your fault. Okay. The order is the case, difficult. I'm gonna do framework and then like Mao cooperative. Okay.
Is that? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
What?
I'm sorry. I just have to get my mic. I'm not weird.
lost your time.
Sorry. I'm good. There it is.
Yes, space is here. She can't seven system needs a magic revolution in a new place. Our GG happens to set Earth's struggles have empirically failed, which is why any struggle on the Earth will be corrupted. So will be grouped together with those other struggles that fail, which corrupts the overall movement and the effectiveness of the movement. There is a body of truth since we all participate in the project. It's a common heritage. The Earth is common to everybody on the Earth, so that means that everybody can accept this body of truth. You aren't affected by capitalism any more than we are. So their effect argument, it doesn't really matter. The plan does access better internally to effect the common project that involves everybody on the Earth, whereas the alternative is just the people within this room who none of us are probably affected by the injustices of capitalism too much. So the plan access better internally to their effect argument. The
state does not necessarily desire mastery. We can reform.
Yeah, the state does not necessarily desire mastery. We can reform and also explain the targets more. How they're critique now the death cult argument. Our impact are not death, rather ethics. People live in horrible conditions throughout the world because of this justification of capitalism. We didn't read our affirmative traditional extinction effect. Quite frankly, I've been unhappy with finding out about the things the horrors of capitalism, the slums in India, the sweatshops in China, etc. People are subjected to horrible conditions throughout the world, which is what our affirmative argument against the environment is being destroyed in species. The species are being subjected to horrible conditions. We are not responsible for what we did in other debates, so that argument doesn't matter. Also, this is not a pre-fiat question. That's unfair, and the framework arguments that they've made in the ToC obviously apply here across what they also this contradicts the framework argument anyway. All stuff should be evaluated on the same level. If we want our ethics arguments in that means that the affirmative is a good idea. Also, the structure of the world is created by the real, and the plan is the only way to change that. So that means that we are connected, and now the framework arguments on the macro critique. We agree with this framework as long as we still get to weigh the benefits of state action versus capitalism. The way I'm interpreting this is that if we prove that state action is better than a revolution, then we would win this debate and reject the argument off the team on permutation to the alternative. And also the framework arguments that they exclude the affirmative in its entirety. That's obviously unfair. We should at least get to weigh the impacts and the methodology that we have to solving the base. That's the only fair thing. Now the macro critique. First step, resisting capitalism is the ultimate ethical responsibility. People throughout the world are subjected to horrible conditions, which is why it's your first and priority to reject it. We do engage in the genuine Leninist gesture, but through fidelity to the event, which I'll explain more in a second. We are not common heritages. We are not common heritages, which is what their argument is. Our common heritage is establishing space in its entirety as a common. The plan is one common project, which the result of that later, once the movement has grown and once it has grown in effectiveness, it can be common heritage space. So that is not the plan. Face also just a question of the politics that we use. We are not corrupted since we have fidelity to the event, and the fiat of the plan means that it will certainly have no chance for most of their problems with this. We did not concede the Earth first argument. We are link turning this. Because focusing on the Earth first means that we fail across by the GK arguments and the GC arguments from the case. We also do care about the Earth. We are not saying that the capitalists will take over the Earth and the world of the plan. Once the movement has taken a hold in space, and it will go back down to the Earth, and that means that we can transform space. Also, their evidence about the Earth being first is about colonization, which is not applicable to the furnace, for example. That's their link turn. Their CHB, also their CHB card assumes that also their arguments about the common heritage assume trees and the effectiveness of trees, whereas there are from is the common project space, which is now the rest of the debate on this whole question of whether or not the state action or individual action is better. Our argument is that political action with the state better. Ace point is subtraction. Only having the state act in a non-state, although it subtracts from traditional roles, we have to go in opposite directions. That's the ToC clean evidence, and the one you see evidence. It has a historical example since that even when we try to act in revolutions, those have always failed. All the historical examples that he gives in crossings of the ToC and the ToC have all failed because of the same reason. They all make concessions. They do not have genuine things that they can point to. The plan is an act of metaphor. Condensation is a metaphor for the overall capitalist struggle. It's a metaphor for the overall capitalist struggle. There have been other examples where individuals develop, for example, the protest against the W2 of all failed because they do not have anything concrete. You also cannot. Also they make some argument that they don't need to an alternative solvency in order to solve. You cannot act. Their card does not make their Zizek card does not make the same level of the magnitude of the impact. It does not say that they would solve our impacts. It does not say that you would solve the ethics argument. Our Zizek card say that the only way to solve ethics is to actually get rid of capitalism. Since they do not access on the same magnitude that we do. Their capitalism on a universal card is not responsive to metaphor. Condensation of the plan is particular, but it stands for their struggle against capitalism as a whole. Now our ToC Zizek card says that when it says that the only way to solve is through the third way left, because if you just act on individuals, well, that means that you're implicitly something to try to witness the capitalism or obtain evidence, and when you act as individuals, the individuals will inevitably fear what's going to happen. So fear the overall entity of the the capitalist order, so that means that it will fail. Or also the other two check in, and Dean Card say that when you act within the field of capitalism, then you do not have a political act. When you don't have a political act in itself, that means that people will just be marginalized on the side, which is why you need to act within the state. The plan has the state act in a way that is not used to acting. That the permutation is the best option because it includes, and it is legitimate because it includes a method of a revolution on the side of the state acting on itself. This argument would access double solvency, since we both have the same impact, which is pretty much ethics. Then double solvency does matter because we would be able to access the same thing. And also, if it's true that only the gesture of the alternative counts, then the permutation would certainly solve that gesture for it. But there's a risk that the permutation would be able to solve better. So that means the permutation would be net beneficial. So and if we win these ethics arguments, then that also takes out the ethical argument.
What should we have?
You know, 5 weight.
5 weight. Okay, go ahead. I don't know what's cards. Next.
You all having a nice time?
It's not like watching a football game.
No, it's a, yeah, well.
It's more like watching a trial.
I was going to say, it might be like watching a football game for me. I don't really have any idea what's going on there, but yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot more interesting than I thought it would be.
Good. Good. Yeah, it's always really great when parents come. Sometimes it's hard to convince the kids of that.
Yeah,
But,
it's a double-edged sword, actually.
As a coach, I really like it.
Yeah. I have a tendency to make faces in general when we get discussions. So it's like, come on.
No faces.
So
Poker face.
the first
Poker
couple
face.
of days, I just had my eyes closed because,
Oh.
if there was any eye rolling, it would not have been evident. But I think I'm pretty well trained now, so
I like it.
pretty neutral.
It's like,
I don't pick up, it's certainly not something I would ever wanted to do when I was in high school.
Yeah.
It's absolutely so cerebral.
Yeah.
And I was much more into just fun.
Yeah.
Although I know they think this is fun.
Yeah.
But it wasn't my kind of, I just like the
Yeah.
music, dance, hard
Sure,
kind of thing.
sure.
But I just love hearing our youth. It gives me hope for the future.
Yeah.
That we have
Yeah.
people who are
Hearing about social revolutions and
so passionate. But they,
Cool, all right.
That's awesome. I like it a lot. Good. 8 more seconds.
There's only one K.
There's only one kind of.
It's like a theoretical game.
I didn't go to your cards, I guess. Is the extent of the games. All right. Everyone good? Good? All right. They have conceded a better life and a benefit to the alternative action. You can say that life needs to be lived at the access to dark and critical claim that the suicide bomber is more life than the person driving the hospital because life must be lived at its limits. When life is confined to the moments of trying to preserve life, and trying to preserve survival makes living life impossible. You can only know what it means to be alive when you're living at the access of dying. This is an internal link, and that benefit to voting for the criticism because it means we access all value life, because their affirmative is just a continuation of escaping capitalism. That is why they say all the communists in God's face. Our argument is that fighting through revolution is not preferable because the only way to obtain value life should come from your nebulous ethics claim because anything else is an obligation to the other through a transaction, which is an internal link to their argument about capitalism, because the reason why their ethics claim is just reify capitalism because it assumes a market economy. You should try to protect your subjective value providing money else. You can still guarantee values for others by engaging revolution. Now the alternative is able to solve the majority of the case. Our evidence is pretty good on the question of why violent revolution is able to succeed. We have the best historical empirics about the only disruption of capitalism have been done through violent revolutions. China, Russia, as well as China, they have no empirical analysis as to why a rupture of capitalism. All they have is forms of reformism arguments, but in order for them to win their fidelity toward communism and all its totality they need to win a rupture to the system, which are linked to make proofs. They do not have a link to make proper. These are all these to the permutation which they should not even be able to get because they conceded the thesis out of framework argument that this the biggest one of competing methods, one of competing methods they conceded are drilled on 5 evidence says that they're 9 forms that teach a more pressure because it lets the capitalist system just continue to attack them and to fight with violent things. Conceded the choice argument that they chose to defend institutional reform. You should not allow them to sever out of their institutional reform argument. There's no real dissent to other offers against the alternative besides sovereignty. So if we win the direction of the link debate, you can vote negative on presumption because there's only a risk that the further retrenches capitalism more. Now the real link debate proper. The first link is their idea of the common heritage. You should hold them to their plan. It said that the plan would develop a commons in space, not a common project, which is what I keep going on. They've conceded the block analysis anyway, but just as they've conceded on the ethical contain the 1AR, their non-specification of what that necessarily means destroys all negative graphics we can never get to exist. That to them allows them to say things like, oh, we're set, like maybe our conversation room that was at the top of the difficult debate, the 1AR, you should hold the threshold. This might be reason to team, but it is the reason why you should give us leeway on this government. Now there's several things. First is the idea that it only benefits the wealthy. Your friend said that it's explicit that the common heritage principle only benefits wealthy because they are the ones that have access to space. The second is which they conceded that even if they win their argument that they are only one project, they conceded the analysis. They still construct the world outside of it as disposable, which internally turns all of their viewing as capital arguments because they still view nature as a form of consumption. You can vote negative now. They still assume that the world only exists as a resource for us to be commodified and collected even for the collectives, which means that is a reason to vote negative. The second argument is they make the argument that they're able to fiat. This fiat argument is ridiculous, both ridiculous, new, and abusive. They want to argue that the fiat of all of our linked debates makes it impossible for the negative to generate strategy. They will defend the outcomes of governmental policy. The second link is our first argument was conceded in the tweet. You should not allow the 1AR arguments that should stop arguments. Our Jarrett argument is much better than their believing or the allows for distancing where they don't see themselves as part of the planet. They see themselves as strangers. This means that it makes them impossible to actually solve for the objective balance of capitalism because it all just fades into the peripheries. So how can you possibly see the poison, the killing of wolves, from helicopters, toxic dump to cutting down of forests when you are out of space? It's exactly a dissent to their interpretation because they allow for a psychic disconnect. The impact is a willing down to the destruction of the biosphere, which is an independent link to the mechanism of the one they cannot get out. The third is the idea of the third link will be more on the question of the reform date. Now, the reform date, they're very proper. Their argument that revolution failed is new, and the new one area set up in cross-takes. But the reason that Mao's failed today continue revolution to act as Zizek and choose the cultural revolution in China did it Kenny Allen since they tried to go by himself. She's goal reception to full power, rid of the top no such competition it is. See, they came out or the restore stage or the parallel between Mao and the Khan is not fully raised moments and followers in order to get rid of leaders of the man of the paradox that the leader who triggers and control enough people to try to exert full force of power, which means all you need to win is you vote for the revolution and the axis. Now the revolution is necessary to the fall. We control the best empirics that are able to solve our. They've conceded our Zizek evidence that capitalism is universal. What this means essentially is that even though knowledge development experience capitalism differently, it exists a universal force which people continually, regardless of their culture, still making that transaction based on monetary policy, which means you require a full rejection of the idea of the universal system of capitalism. There are two reasons that. First, this then drives with all their arguments about body for truth and fidelity, because you cannot obtain a fidelity to the bed if you are a single issue rejection of capitalism. Proves all their arguments are not genuine to the one to see. The second is making real rejection impossible. Or Zizek evidence says that these forms of single issue movements are impossible to actually challenge the state because they just let their grievances continue. Their cane evidence says that individuals will not work. Yeah. This is not responsible. You can see the all self-professional links.
314, was that it? Or 334? 334. I remember there was a... Not that cool.
Not yet.
Can I get my timer? Ready? I'm going to answer the hidden value of life work in the first value of life. The perpetual self-belief to this argument because it's still engaged in revolution. We reform to say that at the same time their revolution occurs. That means that they believe to this not you. That means believe to this not you. Now the perpetuation solves both best aid. The perpetuation do both solves best aid. They concede that double solvency does not in the world of capital subordination. And the subordination of the utmost ethical responsibility. Otherwise, everyone in the world suffers not about their death. It's about the suffering of everyone in the world. Everyone on the peripheries. And they self trying to everyone dying on the streets of the glorious imperial empire here. Everybody creating the suit. Everybody creating the clothing that you wear in the sweatshops and trying to all suffer. Be combined to say the actual act of revolution. The alternative is essential. It's all because it means all of these subtraction resolves all the link revolution. This revenue all links, for the exception may become heritage, but I'll get that in a second because that's not really linked to the combination of the revolution with subtraction actually allows it to work more successfully because we reorganize the state internally and maintain the revolution itself. All their other links are not mutually exclusive. Our subtraction argument is not supposed to be there in the case that reform the state is cool, but only doing individual reform is impossible because the state is such a totalitarian power that it will restrict any sort of reform. They say fighting good negligence, permutation solves fighting, permutation solves fighting good time mutually exclusive. They say we apply this is a capitalist argument, and in of itself the idea that you have to protect yourself from the system of capital is in of itself capitalist because it ignores everybody else living. It ignores everybody else living in the periphery. They say all the revolutions past have failed. However, Zizek evidence can keep the breath. The reason that the cultural revolution things in China failed is because they failed to reorganize the state. They failed to reorganize the state. They took the full on revolution against the state and embracing sickness totality does not work. Zizek can think that creates authoritarian regimes. That creates authoritarian regimes. Also, fidelity was absent there. Reducing Zizek can indicate fidelity that is necessary to maintain the struggle against capital because focusing on the consequences of the struggle, like those regimes did, actually creates a stopgap that obscures us from the struggle against capital. Also, the reason that they failed is because they happened at the wrong time. Zizek 9 out of 10 indicate that right now is the perfect time for revolution because we are reaching DC point. That means all the capitalist crises are colliding on themselves, which gives us the ability to point to real social antagonisms that are present in the
status quo and say, look, there are the slums in China, there are the sweatshops, there are sweatshops in China, slums in India, etc. All those things are reason capitalism is bad, and ecological diversity is failing the status quo, technological, digital control complex, etc. That is decreasing down to time revolution. So we have to reform the state. Revolution is not right. Revolution is not right. They say reading methodologies, they depression, however they do reading methodology actually self-depression best. They say capital is the ultimate ethical responsibility, which means permutation is best. They say fight battle, please serve to institutional reform. However, they say fight battle, please serve to institutionalized reform. However, we do not sever reform victims. We give them all the you have all privatization good and have good records. I don't know what guys are losing. We're not institutional reform. It's permutation. Do both. It's institutional reform combined with the revolution. They say get communism because of they say engaging the earth is necessary. In case that this is a flawed methodology, even when all their claims of engaging the earth is necessary, the permutation solves that. However, case that this in case that going to space is actually necessary to engage the earth because the earth has been seen as corrupted with capitalism. That means only engaging the other is truly the other in space. One that we have not seen that we've not yet seen capitalism in is central solving because it creates the space for us to imagine a world without capitalism, because it creates a utopian space for us to imagine a world without capitalism in the first place, which allows us to transition to everything else would be seen as a reform of the rearrangement of the world at present, which means that these sorts of capitalism.
That doesn't ignore the earth, it just allows us to be more effective.
And that doesn't ignore the earth, it just allows us to be more effective. They say common heritage, however, they say common heritage leads to disposable material. However, we do not like disposable material. We just say common heritage is essential to first of all, it's not common heritage. The affirmatively established the common space, which is a tangible thing that is communal. It's not established space as a common heritage. It's not like both Muslims, college, neoliberals, math, etc. We just have to create one tangible thing in space that allows us to see communism is possible, and that communism has not create disposable material. Just essential to create the space to imagine. Just essential to create the space to imagine revolution. They say I did answer that. They say reject the argument, not the team. I'm the second argument. They say Lisa distance failed to solve. I already answered this, and we're distancing ourselves instead. We already see the constant assessment. That's perfectly heard. We see how everybody's down. Go to space down. Does not zero the top. They say they say I answered that above. They say state actions here. Archie came and Dina followed that rupturing hegemon fear from which capitalism exists is necessary. Is necessary in order to engage because it is the only way to reform state to operate not say the most essential. They say continue universal. However, they continue G-check. However, even though the plans in particular ban, it stands for the metaphor connotation for the universal against capitalism, which means that it's all they have no link or themselves in common heritage, which are mutually exclusive, which means it's enough reason for you to vote on the permutation. Right.
First, I'd like to say that I thought this debate was truly excellent. I don't think it's very often that I am more excited about the debate that I'm judging than literally just about anything else I could possibly be doing at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and that happened in this debate. So I was really very impressed. And I want to say, before I decide, or before I announce, I guess, that I really enjoyed judging both of these teams an extensive amount. I've judged you all since you were like 12, and enjoyed each and every time. And you all participated in 2 of the debates that I've enjoyed most this year. So really, very excellent job for both teams. I do end up voting negative. I think that the affirmative frames this as a question of sort of double solvency and the permutation avoiding the problems of the AF, the links that they win. So that leaves you with a set of questions. The first is there a link that the permutation doesn't resolve? And I think that there are 2. I think that the first is this question of whether establishing a commons continues the domination of a few countries' role in space. The negative phrases this in the block as something like Uganda doesn't have a space program, and those sorts of countries don't have the same access to the commons. And I think that this is something that perhaps the AF could respond to, but just doesn't get specifically articulated in really either the 1AR or the 2AR. The 2AR is a little bit closer, but not actually explaining to me how it resolves the issue of countries that don't have a space program accessing space. And this is part of why I called for the plan text and the questions of solvency and sort of the gotta go to space cards. Because I'm trying to figure out if there's some reason that, maybe you give Uganda a space program, I'm not sure. But the way that this is explained to me in cross-ex, the best I can figure, and if this is a mistake, this is an explanation problem, is that you give anyone who wants to go there access to whatever you create in space. The negative is winning a link argument based on that is an inherently unequal form of access. That saying that everyone has access is not the same thing when 5 to 6 countries have a space program, not the countries that we need in order to fight this struggle. So I think that they initially win, the same countries are still in charge link. The second link I think that they win is this question of escape and what it means to say that people can go away. And Frank's evidence in the 1NC sort of describes this as, when we think of it as a question of escape, we still pillage the resources. The description in that card is those who possess the technology may continue to exploit resources. And so I think that this is another thing that the affirmative needs to respond to with far more precision on what happens to those resources, what happens to the rest of space, and what happens to sort of whatever this thing is that you create. This is a place where, again, I think more specificity about what the AF is earlier in the debate would actually help the AF more than it hurts the neg. I think that in this debate particularly, not having fleshed out as of the 1AC what exactly you create in space ends up hurting you in ways that were sort of unfortunate in this debate, because I think the descriptions are really very high level. That ends up hurting you because it means that some of the things that you could describe to get out of these links are not things that get debated about in this debate. So maybe, if it's a satellite, does everyone have access to, what comes down from the satellite, the information? Is that how everyone gets access? Is this like the ISS and we pay to send people there? All of these are things that I think that the AF could resolve with precision, but does not do so in this debate, which was unfortunate. Because I think that those are all ways you can get out of some of these links. So for example, if you put a satellite up there, I'm not totally sure how the satellite means we sort of exploit the resource in the same way Frank's is talking about, because that seems to be much more of a using up natural resources kind of link. But again, that was not discussed, and so I think that they win both a link of we continue to have the same people in charge, and then they exploit the resources. Then the second question I looked at is whether going to space is key to engage capitalism. Is there an independent net benefit to just we got to be up there even if there are some reasons that it's bad? I think here is a place where the AF, sort of the tension is the wrong word, but the interplay between the role of the imagination in the affirmative and the role of fiat in the affirmative needs to be more clearly articulated, because you lose an ability to create offense. Your evidence about going to space is definitely in the context of imagining space as a place and not actually going there. And that's not a problem in that they get offense on it, but it is a problem in terms of your ability to say that we actually have to be in space to create that offense. And I think that it makes some of the negative depictions of the AF a little bit better than they would have been if you had evidence that talked about why we actually have to have the people in space. Because I think that they win some good arguments about why having the people actually go there is bad. It distances ourselves from the Earth. I also think this is a place where that weird cross-section of the 2AC, I'm not genuinely sure exactly what happened in terms of why there was a disconnect between the question and the answer. But the question and the answer, as I was listening, seemed to indicate that we sort of send the communists to space, and that's definitely not what I think that you're trying to say, but that is definitely what is said in the cross-section, or at least the way it is characterized. And that just may be I hate to say this, but I think it may just be a starting to answer the question before you know what the question is problem, because both times he says, wait, you send them to space? And you're like, yes, we obviously do that. And he's like, whoa, 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 we send all the communists to space? We leave the capitalists here and we send the communists? And you're like, yeah, we send anyone who wants to go, we send them. And that becomes a problem when there is then a disconnect between imagining space as this place of awesomeness and actually sending away the communists. I think that the negative gets away with characterizing your AF as far more like, get the communists off the earth so the capitalists can reign supreme, which is not really what I think you do, but I think that you need to do a lot more to contest that depiction of your AF. So if your response to that description is, but we don't do that, we don't do that, we don't do that, I totally agree that I don't think that you intend to do that, but I think both the cross-ex question and the lack of response to that 2NR characterization mean that they're winning some offense there. I think that you do win some reasons that imagining a new world would be good, but I think that ultimately the negative is a head on why we need to stay to fight. The description in both the 2NC and the 2NR is like, how can you possibly see the killing of wolves from space? And they sort of win this psychic distancing argument that when we're further away from the Earth, we cannot see the problems of the structural violence. We don't see the problems of, forestry destruction, I think is the other argument they make. And that ultimately means that we don't have an ability to make those changes. I think that the closest you come is sort of this, like, we go to space and then we come back to Earth question. I think, again, this is where more description of how the AF actually works, like the nitty-gritty of the fiat of the AF, would help you, because then maybe, if you like send them there for a year and then bring them back, maybe this is just like totally a non-starter because they come back to Earth and then they like look at the wolves and they've seen the Earth from space and they're like, oh, we see the wolves and the Earth and it's wonderful. But without that characterization, I have trouble knowing what that means. The third thing I considered is whether the negative objections to the affirmative were sort of just consequences of the struggle, and that I should ignore those. Because you make this argument that sort of the consequences are not relevant, and I should just continue to struggle, fidelity to the cause, etc. But I think that this is not just like a transition war style argument or a we create violence on Earth style argument. They're ultimately contesting the entire method of, or the approach toward struggling against capitalism. So I don't think that it is just a set of consequences. And then finally, I considered whether double solvency, if doing this twice and maybe being the most ethical, having the most ethical struggle as the 2AR describes it, outweighs all of these things. And I think that if you had been able to fight it back to just like ground zero, like our AF is not good, but it might be. You described this as only a risk that the AF might be good. Then probably I would have voted AF on double solvency. But ultimately, I think that the resolution of the first question, sort of the link that the permutation doesn't solve, means that the AF is actually bad for the struggle for capitalism as opposed to just not good. The last thing I looked at, sorry, two last things I got, is whether the question of engaging the state is so important that I ignore all of the things, the ways they have one links to your affirmative, and I just have to engage the state. And I do think that your evidence is pretty good on engaging the state, is better than not, but I think that given the magnitude of the link they have won that your sort of method of engaging the state is ultimately worse than not engaging the state at all. Question?
So how did you determine that the links that the permutation did not resolve outweighed like the space keys type stuff?
Yeah, I don't think that you're winning enough, very much of space key at all, is the answer. I think if you win like all in on just like have to be in space, like if this is a debate about like, ground-based satellites versus, solar satellites or something, and you win have to be in space, I think that you win this debate. But I don't think that you won very much of have to be in space given their evidence about distancing.
Okay.
Okay, makes sense.
You all, excellent throughout. I think that, one second, I do think that you should have extended that ball. They wrapped the theory argument, I don't know. But, like 20 seconds, not a 2NR. But I do think that, when the 2AC radically mishandles an argument, that should be something that should be considered in the 2NR. The 1NR I thought was okay, not as good as when I saw you earlier. And I think that the reason is ironically, that you were debating this like a K and not like a theory argument. You have to debate this like T, okay? You have read a topicality interpretation that they have dropped. You read a T interpretation and they read their feminism answers. That's how you should approach this debate, okay? You were you had to be T human, and they were like, but feminism is not that important and we need to continue to struggle. This is a non sequitur to what you had said in the 1NC, and you need to be even more aggressive on debating it that way. And I think that you have to debate it like, we have read an interpretation, they have not met that interpretation, they have not proposed a counter-interpretation for why death arguments should be included in debate. These debates are bad. I think you win the reasons why the debates are bad, but are sort of not as good on the reasons why, and these reasons are in the 1NC, so it's just a matter of extending and explaining them, why that means that we should exclude them from the debate as a matter of interpretation. So debate that debate like T and not like a K, and I think that that's pretty easy for us. Okay, 2NC and 2NR. Like I said, I thought they were very good. The one thing I will say is I think that you need to do a little bit better job of specifically applying your arguments to the aft pockets of offense. Which is not to say that you don't do that. It's like, obviously at the top you talk about the net benefit to the alternative versus the permutation and that sort of thing. But you have a slightly less line-by-line style, which I think ultimately helps you. But there are places where you could be saying, this answers X argument, especially in the 2NR. That would just make your life a little bit easier. It's not that you didn't make, pretty much all of the arguments that you needed to make. But I think that if you do a little bit more of applying those arguments to aft offense and just like identifying aft offense, you'll be better off. So you spend a lot of time talking about your arguments, which is obviously good, but identifying like, here's the way the aft could win this debate, here is why they didn't do that or why they can't do that at this point in the debate, will make your life easier than just winning your argument. And I think sort of it's clear that in thinking about the 2NR, you have clearly thought about how the aft can win the debate, because I think that the 2NR is sort of implicitly structured around those arguments. Make that explicit.
Okay.
Other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.